videos are up there. I haven't started marketing this yet though,
Mhm.
so I'm not right now. I'm just like putting everything in a certain place,
Right.
and then when the podcast comes out, I'm going to take the videos down, but put them up there as each episode is coming out every week. So,
Great. Yeah, share it with me.
um,
Share it.
oh no, definitely, definitely. And at any point, if anything comes up, please stop and we can just pause for a second. I'll re-ask the
Well,
question. We'll pick up from there. All right. Let me make sure I got my phone on silent because it's embarrassing when the host's phone goes off. All right. It's happened to me a couple times. All right. Kristen, I wanted to start just really kind of like by introducing you to everybody and what you do at Poynter. And also, you know what, to remind people, I mean, a lot of us who are in the business, we know what Poynter is, but to remind people, what is Poynter?
Poynter is, well, first of all, Poynter is the last name of Nelson Poynter, who is the publisher and owner of the St. Petersburg Times, which is now the Tampa Bay Times. And Mr. Poynter was very prescient years and years ago when he created I think it was called at the time the Modern Media Institute, but essentially a nonprofit home to be both the owner of the newspaper to keep it out of, the hands of big chains, which is now something we see more than ever, and hedge funds, but also to have a place to train journalists to better do their jobs. We work in an industry that what we do is a craft, and a lot of us might go to college for it. A lot of us don't. And what we do is a lot of learning on the job and needing to brush up on things that maybe you don't learn in journalism school, like how to cover a mass shooting, how to verify videos that you're seeing online, how to detect a hoax, how to keep from getting doxxed. So we basically exist to continue helping journalists and the public make sure that journalism is strong in our country and around the world, to support and protect healthy democracies. And my work at Poynter is specifically about local news. I've been at Poynter for 8 years. Before that, I was a local reporter at newsrooms in Missouri for 10, and started reporting on local news just, kind of because I care about it and think it's important, and it turned into a beat. And I've been doing it ever since, and that has transitioned now into also a teaching role.
Something so fascinating that you just said. You think about what a journalist is and is supposed to be. And as you said, some people go to school for it and others don't. But if you go out, you could study anything and
Mhm.
then become a journalist. But I know and have had bosses who've told me it's not rocket science, and yet it's something that if we get wrong, it could be very damaging. But how do you define for people, since you don't have to necessarily go to school for it, why anybody can be a journalist, but it requires something. What is it we do exactly that's so important?
I love this question because it's, compared to social media, compared to blogs, compared to pundits who are, spouting off on TV, what makes journalism different? And I think what makes, the act of journalism different, than a lot of other media that you might consume is we have a loosely agreed upon set of values. And they include doing no harm, sharing what's happening, um, you know, giving a voice to people who often aren't heard. Shining a light in dark places is a phrase that journalists like a lot. And for me, connecting and reconnecting our communities with each other. There's a watchdog aspect to journalism that is at its core. That is, we want to make sure that the people who work for us in the government are doing the work that they're supposed to be doing. And I think there's some connective tissue too. And this comes into local, particularly about what does it mean to live here, and who are the people that live in our community, and what can we learn about each other so that we can be a stronger community. That all of those things I think are part of healthy journalism.
And your focus is on local journalism, and you think about, you know, with the world we live in today, it's not just that we have a lot of channels. It's that you have so many sources and so much information coming at us from everywhere. But how do you define and help people understand? There's the national news, the international news, and there's your local news, and each one we're all journalists doing the same thing, but the focus is different.
I think that the best way I can describe it is in each instance, the media they're responsible to a different set of people, and local journalists are responsible. We report for and to people who live in a particular community, people who are from a particular community, people whose tax dollars are spent in a particular community, and that means we're at school board meetings. That means we're covering elections. That means we're at the high school basketball game to report on who won. There is a deeper involvement in day-to-day life. It's also really easy to take that for granted because so much feels national, because we have social media platforms that have a tendency to discount local and sort of wipe out that voice. And because we have had now more than a decade of struggles with a business model based on, people buying advertising in a print paper or supporting, television through advertisements, legacy media through a model that doesn't work anymore. So, but I think that the best distinction for me is, who do you answer to? And in local media, you answer to the people in the community that you live in.
So, I mean, I see different things. I know that I've watched over the last 25 years I've been in the business how the business has changed. Most of my career has been in radio, but I've watched my friends in newspapers and my friends in television and how their industries are all shifting. And when it comes to local coverage, though, I don't know. I've heard different things. I mean, I've seen local newspapers that keep disappearing, but I've also heard in some places that local news is starting to is having a renaissance. But what's happening to local news in general? And I'm sure that from community to community, there may be a different story.
Yeah, that last thing that you said is really the key. I mean, both things are happening, and both things have been happening for a while. I would say that, to me, from my perspective and my own experience since the Great Recession, local news and newspapers, legacy publications have been struggling. There's been rounds of layoffs. At the same time we had the recession, though, we also had, the advent of cell phones and the advent of the internet and free information available easily. And so at the same time that the business model changed and we had the economy crash, we also had user habits changing. And a lot of newsrooms that before then were the only source didn't adjust very well, didn't, failed to imagine that they could ever be replaced. What's happened slowly, and then in some cases, especially in the pandemic, more quickly, has been just a lot of shrinking, closing. I counted more than 100 newsrooms that have closed during the pandemic. There are what we call news deserts, where people have, no or few options for information. News donut holes, where you might live outside in a suburban community. The city has coverage, but you don't. And ghost newspapers, which is, what used to be a, 40, 50, 100 person newsroom, maybe now has 3 people, corporate owners. People are making decisions in a community other than your own. And they're mostly reprinting, Associated Press or wire copy. What's happened, though, I think largely has been there are fewer local media sources than there were when you began your career 25 years ago, and certainly when I began my career 18 years ago. And at the same time, again, particularly through the pandemic, we've seen some really great innovation that has recognized that media, in order to be meaningful, has to be built with the community and in it and from it, and not just for it. And so there are, I could list a lot, but Outlier in Detroit is a great example of this. They use text messaging primarily to answer people's questions. El Timpano takes the same approach in California. I'm excited about Berkeley Side in Berkeley, California. Richland Source in Mansfield, Ohio is a for-profit newsroom that is thriving right now and has found some smart ways to do so through advertising, membership, community support, and merchandise. It depends on your community and where you live, what
Right.
sort of media is going to fit. And that's different than what we've had for generations, which is, this is a newspaper. This is what it looks like. This is your public radio station. Here's the broadcast news. Maybe here's an alt weekly. what we're seeing now, I think, is a renaissance, and I'm excited about it because the journalists who are building it, unlike maybe post the Great Recession, have come to the understanding that what they're building primarily is a business. And if you're going to build a business, you have to have a business plan. You have to make money. And that is an exciting, I think, and a good change.
There's a couple things that you said. Let's go back to this is fascinating because I mean Poynter and you've had the list that you're tracking of newsrooms that are disappearing.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been watching this list for a while. And I mean, it's just depressing. I just keep thinking, my God, well, what's left?
Yeah.
But I mean, so 100 newsrooms. Are we talking mostly newspapers, weeklies, or even television, radio? What is that mostly?
Mostly newspapers and weeklies, some magazines, some local magazines, lots of alt weeklies. Yeah, mostly print.
So have you seen these news deserts? Also, I'd imagine are growing as well.
I haven't mapped this, and I don't know that the group that maps this is usually with the professor Penny Abernathy, who is now, I think, at Northwestern or Medill. I haven't seen her latest mapping. What I've found generally is that these are usually in smaller, like they're weeklies, right? And so they're in more rural places. Oftentimes they have survived as long as they have because the people in those communities don't have great access to broadband. Right. So in some cases, this is the lifeblood. This is how you get information. And the pandemic took a lot of those places down.
You talk about business model. And so, I wondered like what you've seen change, and I don't know I'm not in those accounting offices, so I don't know what those conversations are. I mean, look, public radio obviously depends on some public dollars, but also donor dollars and underwriting as well. I know that everything else is still the television, still advertising. Newspapers have really been hit hard, as you said, because that was such a big part of their business model, and that's long gone. But what have you seen in innovations in business models? I mean, have newsrooms figured a better? You said that journalists have had to become business people. Mm-hmm. They basically have to think like an entrepreneur.
So there are several, and I would say that none of them, I think, work on their own. I think you have to have like a portfolio of approaches that you're going to take. Sorry to sound like a business person. The more I report on this, the more I feel like I should have gone to business school.
Let's do the stocks now. Here we go.
Yeah. So they include membership programs, right? So the membership programs are different than what you have in public media. Public media is, we'll have a drive. I'm a member of my local public media right here in Tampa. They take money out of my bank account every month. I support their work. That's almost more of a subscription model where it's a transaction. Membership, though, the idea, and this work was sort of best documented by a group called Membership Puzzle Project. Membership is we're going to have a relationship, and what are the skills you can bring to us? What do you want to know about? What do you want to learn about? We're going to be in communication with you. We're going to find out what it is our community wants, and they're going to support us in a variety of ways, including through their time, their talents, and money, if that's how they choose to do it. So membership is an exciting one, and member-supported newsrooms, I think, particularly when you think about digital, for-profit and nonprofit, that there's some exciting possibilities there because people are involved and want to be involved in what happens. Often membership is what one pundit calls, it lets you have an open garden. So whereas you think of subscriptions are a walled garden, right? And so you have to pay to get in. Membership is, I want to support this because I want everyone to have it. I think that that's important. Mm-hmm. We have also seen an interesting trend of for-profit newsrooms, so newspapers included, working with local philanthropy. The good news is that there's a lot of money in a lot of communities. Often it's in community foundations. There are community organizations who care about, the financial health of that community, who care about the physical health of that community and want certain things to be covered. And so Richland Source in Mansfield, Ohio is a good example of this. They have had several projects funded by community organizations with very clear, explanations that we're independent. They don't have anything to do with what we're covering. They don't get to look at it ahead of time. Here's the coverage that we're going to focus on. That's an exciting turn. Merchandise, I think, is a place that could go even more. We all live in a place that we're like, there is an identity, right? There's an identity living in Tampa Bay, where I live. And if the Tampa Bay Times decided to sell Tampa Bay merchandise with our zip codes or mugs or t-shirts or something, I would definitely buy that. That would be something that would be important. And I think, a revenue stream, live events, RIP the last 2 years, but before the pandemic, live events were really popular. The Texas Tribune has had a great amount of success having live events, and that where people want to pay and come and either hear journalists, talk to the public. The storytellers nights, these are basically live storytelling events from the USA Today network, has also been very successful.
It sounds like basically you as you said, you have to have a basket, a portfolio of a lot of things.
Yeah.
If you don't, it's like any big company. You're not just Amazon started by selling books and now they sell everything.
Right.
Which maybe that's the way to go. What do you think people get wrong about journalists? And you said you kind of said it earlier to me, is that we're not doing a good enough job telling our story. But I mean, look, we get attacked by politicians all the time. That's nothing new. That goes back to the start of this, of our nation. But right now, I mean, any poll we pull shows that we're not seen very favorably. And I'm wondering
Yeah.
what do people get wrong about us? But what are we doing wrong about selling ourselves here?
First of all, politicians often on both sides don't like us. And
No, they don't.
I don't think it's our job to be popular. I don't think that you don't get into this profession because you want people to like you.
Good point.
You do get into this profession because you want to help your community be better, because you want people to be better informed. It's not a popular job. If we want to be popular, we can go and, sell, sliders and and beer. I mean, we should all go into selling alcohol. That would probably make us more popular. But so I'm okay with the popularity bit. I think the place for concern is distrust, and that is something we have seen growing a lot. There's some great work being done by lots of organizations, including a group called Trusting News, that is working to make journalists change how they work and how they explain what they do, instead of expecting the public to be literate about the media the way that we are, those of us who have to work in it. So some examples are very simple. If you look on most newsrooms' websites, it's impossible to find a staff list or a way to contact them that's not an info at email address. If you want the public to contact you, why is your information so hard to find? You should at least have an email address, right? And a staff list. I think we make the mistake often of assuming that if we put the word opinion on something, or view, or perspective, that people are going to understand that, like, that's not actually journalism. This is someone giving a viewpoint. We have all of these shortcuts that that make sense to us. And we assume that the public understands it. I think we also often don't spend enough time explaining publicly how we work. How does off the record sourcing work? What does it mean when you say on background? Why are we choosing these words? What is the AP style book and why do we follow it? Why do we use courtesy titles? There's just a lot of ways that we work that make sense to us, that I live in a world. I'm not married to a journalist. I don't have any journalists in my family. My friends aren't journalists. And so I spend a lot of time listening to their assumptions. We don't take money for what we do. We're paid for our work by our employers. We don't go someplace, to cover something and take money. We probably don't even take a cup of coffee. And we don't explain our ethics and the ways that we ensure that we can be as unbiased as possible. And I think we also have made a mistake for a long time in assuming that we can be totally neutral when we're humans and we have a perspective and we come from places and we have experiences. And so we often try to hide what our own lived experiences are. And I think that also makes people not trust us because we're not robots. We do come from someplace.
Right. Yeah. Bias is just part of life. That's true. I don't know. Something you were saying triggered something in me. Tell me if I'm wrong. I'm wondering if, and you're right. We're not here to win a popularity contest, but um, maybe we're like referees in a game. People don't like referees, but if you don't have a referee, you have chaos.
Yeah.
And maybe that I don't know. I was trying to figure out what's the best way to describe what we do, because it isn't that simple.
Right. I like that metaphor. I think that some journalists are referees. I think
Yes.
more than ever, a lot of us are reference librarians. A lot of us are the people who are here to help you understand something. You know what happened, right?
Yeah.
You
Hmm.
saw the game, you saw the calls. Here's why. Here's what that player did. Here's the history. Here's what happened to the field before. I think that context piece is really the major value that journalism now is able to offer, is helping people understand not just what happened, but why.
That's a good one. I like that. I like that. I noticed something else, and I don't know if Pointer's looking into this, but I've seen the expansion of newsletters.
Yes.
And I mean, look, we have one at the station. I have to admit, the station I work at, we have a newsletter. It comes out once a week. Um, I mean, and I subscribe to a few, and some of them are really interesting. And, I'll learn little tidbits of things that I may not get anywhere else. But I don't know. Is that replacing local
So it's good.
news?
I'm glad that you asked that. First of all, I write 2 newsletters. I write one
Gotcha.
on local news for Poynter, and I write one on obituaries and the stories behind obituaries for the Tampa Bay Times. And Poynter has a bunch of newsletters. I also subscribe to a bunch of newsletters. I think what newsletters are now are they're the, you know, 13-year-old, 14-year-old boy who used to wake up at 2 a.m. and get the newspapers and deliver them to your door. Newsletters are now your newspaper deliverer, your news boy. And they're bringing the news to you. You're choosing to be there. You're opting in. That is, from a business perspective, a valuable relationship for a news organization because they understand you want to be there. They're not just, sending information out into the void and hoping it hits a couple people on the way out. It is as more of a relationship. We also know from a business and marketing perspective that newsletters are, if you think of your journey as a user, from I don't know about this place at all to I'm going to support them financially. Newsletters are at the top of the funnel that you want to be in and that we want to get people in. So that's where they start to get interested. So my user journey, for instance, with the Washington Post was for years, I got their newsletters. And there's a newsletter they have in the middle of the day with the top headlines that always gets me. And at some point after reading that newsletter, probably for several years, they had a great investigation and a little note at the bottom. If you like our work, you can support it. And I became a subscriber of the Washington Post. And that was because of a sustained relationship through their newsletters that did that. That I don't know that it's replacing it. I did a story recently in my newsletter on the former editor of the Capital Gazette who had started a newsletter through Meta's platform, Meta, formerly Facebook's platform called Bulletin. We also have Substack and Axios and lots of other platforms. And he said something that I think is probably the right way to think about it. He views newsletters as a bridge between what was and what will be. We don't know what will be yet, but newsletters are a way for us to continue communicating information with people until whatever will be comes into fruition.
In the time you spent at Poynter and working with journalists, especially young journalists, what do you see? How people feel about getting into the field, and is it promising for the future?
It is. I actually run a fellowship program at Poynter with 57 young journalists, and it's the best part of my job right now. It's very hopeful. They're mostly Gen Zs. and they are not taking any crap off of anybody, which is, I think, a good thing for everyone, including our industry. They care deeply about doing this work and about having lives. And I think people from at least my generation have often given up everything in order to be a journalist. That's not healthy. Your job doesn't love you back. There's somehow more balance and more recognition. They're coming from a place that's more rooted in their humanity than I think we've been allowed to as an industry before. I'm very excited about it. They care deeply about doing this work and are devoted to doing it in new and interesting ways. They're questioning, processes and traditions that I didn't know we could question personally. And I'm excited to work for them someday, frankly, but I'm excited to see what they're going to build and change with what, we have built before them.
Well, it sounds like maybe that's a conversation we need to have. Some Gen
Yes.
Zers and then the rest of us old fogies talking about the future. To finish up here, talking about the future, and I mean, it's not to predict so much, but just when you look at the trends, when you look at how things have been changing over the time you've been in the industry, what do you think, or what do you hope, in the next 10 years we're going to see, with journalism and where it's going?
What I hope we're going to see is work that's rooted in a place, from a place, and for a place. Newsrooms that exist to work for a community, that are employed by people from that community that look like that community. Journalism has a huge diversity problem, and it still does, and it's been that way, forever. We're at an interesting point right now where I think people have realized, particularly because of the pandemic, how vital information is, how much we need it, and how important it is to our actual survival. And so it's up to newsrooms to, and existing and those that don't yet exist, to take the value that they've shown over the last 2 years and keep showing it and keep telling their stories and keep connecting with people in ways that really matter to their lives. I'm hopeful that that's going to happen, and I think we're going to see it in a lot of different ways. So I won't put my money on any pony in the race, but I might spread it out evenly amongst all of them and cheer for all of them. I'm excited for all of it.
Oh, the future may be holograms and anything else, but I've always felt like is going to be a need for journalists, because there's a need for news. There's always going to be the town crier,
Yeah.
the person who's got to yell out to everybody what's actually happening. So I don't think we're going anywhere. But Kristin, thank you so much. I really appreciate having you in the reporter studio.
Thanks so much. It's been really fun.
Thank you. All right, let me stop broadcast here, and I'm going to